The night was silent, almost too silent for a house where a child lived. The faint creak of old wooden floors seemed to whisper secrets of sorrow, and the dim light of a single lamp flickered in the hallway. Behind a closed door, a little girl sat curled up on the cold floor, her knees pressed against her chest. She was no older than 8, her face pale, her cheeks streaked with tears that wouldn't stop falling. Her voice broke the silence, raw, piercing, filled with desperation. "Stop. Please stop. I can't take it anymore." Her scream cut through the house like shattered glass. She didn't just cry, she begged. Her tiny hands covered her ears as if she could silence the cruel words that had been thrown at her all day. Words that told her she was nothing. Words that told her she was a burden. The walls of that house had seen many things, but tonight they trembled with her voice. Outside the door, the shadow of a man lingered. Not the comforting shadow of a father, not the gentle silhouette of someone who cared, but the dark outline of a figure who thrived on her fear. He stood with clenched fists, breathing heavily, his anger feeding on her weakness. He had no patience for tears, no heart for mercy. "Shut up, girl," he barked, his tone sharp as a whip. "Do you think anyone cares about your whining?" The girl's sobs grew louder. She pressed her face into her knees, trembling, her fragile body shaking with every word he threw at her. Her cry was not only for help, it was the sound of a soul breaking. At that moment, the universe seemed to hold its breath. Because in the distance, down the empty road that led to this forgotten house, the roar of an engine was approaching. A sleek black car cut through the darkness, its headlights slicing across the night. Inside, a man's jaw was clenched tight, his eyes sharp, his mind restless. He had been gone too long. He had trusted too much. And tonight, something told him he was coming home to a truth that could no longer be hidden. The girl's scream reached his ears even before he stepped out of the car. He froze, his blood running cold. That voice, it was his daughter's. He had not heard her cry like that since the night her mother passed. And now, it was back, sharper, louder, more desperate. He didn't knock. He didn't wait. The millionaire, her father, kicked the door open with a force that echoed like thunder. The man in the hallway spun around, his face draining of color as the towering figure stormed in. The girl's sobs stopped for a moment, her wide eyes lifting to the doorway. There he was, her father, the man everyone whispered about, the one with power, with money, with a voice that could silence a room. And he was furious. "What is going on here?" he roared, his voice booming through the house like an earthquake. The walls shook, but not from the girl's cries this time. They shook from the power of a father's fury. The little girl stumbled to her feet, her tears blurring her vision. She wanted to run to him, but her legs were weak. Her father's gaze swept over her trembling frame, her reddened eyes, the bruise on her arm. His heart cracked in two. He had been blind, absent, too caught up in a world of wealth and deals. And while he was away, his daughter had suffered. But not anymore. Because tonight, everything was about to change. And if you felt the chill in your spine as this truth unfolded, take a moment to like this story, share it, and leave a comment. Sometimes, it's in the darkest cries that the strongest voices rise. Silence didn't return after the shout. It fractured. It hung in sharp pieces that refused to settle, as if the house itself knew it had been caught doing something it shouldn't. The man in the hallway took one stiff step back, then another, trying to regain the swagger that bullying had taught him. But swagger dies fast when real power walks into a room. The father crossed the distance to his daughter in 3 long strides. He didn't touch her yet. He dropped to one knee to be small, smaller than his rage, smaller than the fear in her eyes. "Hey," he breathed, voice low enough to be a promise. "Look at me." She did. Big eyes, wet lashes, the kind of hurt that makes grown men feel like imposters in their own skin. He saw it right away, the faint purple bloom on her forearm, thumb-shaped, half hidden beneath the sleeve of a thin sweatshirt. The sort of mark you don't get from falling. The sort of mark that shows where someone decided your body was theirs to handle. "Who did this?" he asked, no louder than a whisper. The man cleared his throat. "She's dramatic. Kid's bruise. She slipped on the stairs earlier." The father didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on the girl. She shook her head once, tiny, the truth captured in the smallest movement. "Him," she mouthed, barely sound at all. Something changed in the father's posture. Nothing explosive, something colder. He stood, and the room seemed to shrink with him. "What's your name?" he asked the man, though the contempt in his tone said the answer didn't matter. "Dale," he said, aggression curling around the single syllable. "Lorraine's partner. This is her house. You can't just—" The father finally turned. "Lorraine isn't here. She's on a night shift," Dale snapped. "We keep the kid. We feed her. We take her to school. She's a handful, always crying, always." The father lifted a hand. The gesture cut him off cleaner than a blade. "Move," he said. Dale didn't. He planted himself in the doorway like a doorstop. It was a mistake. The father stepped forward until they were a breath apart. "I said move." The restraint in his voice made it more dangerous than any shout. Dale flinched first. The father ushered his daughter out of the room, guiding her behind him with his palm hovering near her shoulder. He was careful like a man who'd learned the hard way that some hurts don't like to be touched. He sat her at the end of the couch in the dim living room and crouched again, bringing them level. "Can you breathe for me?" he asked. "In and out." He did it with her. In, out. Her trembling eased from a storm to a shiver. His phone buzzed. He didn't look. He had already texted one word from the driveway. "Inside." That was enough for the driver waiting in the car, and for the two men who trailed the father during weeks when threats ran louder than rumors. He didn't want a scene. He wanted order. He wanted truth. "Where's your backpack?" he asked gently. She pointed to a chair. He opened it with reverence. A child's backpack shouldn't have to be a crime scene, and found what he feared. Unchecked homework, 2 letters from the school about unexcused absences, a permission slip signed and dated a month ago, and a small, spiral notebook with bent corners. When he lifted the notebook, a necklace slid out. Cheap chain, tiny silver heart. He'd given it to her on her 6th birthday, the last one they all spent together. The heart was cracked straight through, repaired with a smear of glue, the kind of fix an 8-year-old tries when something precious breaks, and she's afraid to tell anyone. He put the necklace in her palm and closed her fingers around it. Then he opened the notebook. The pages were neat for a child, letters still learning where to stand between the lines. Some days were drawings, a house with a door that looked like a mouth, a stick figure with big, angry eyebrows. Most days were words. Short sentences, repeated like prayers that didn't work. "He gets mad when I cry. He says I cost too much. I hide in the bathroom. I miss Mom. I want Dad to come home. I can't take it anymore." Every line hit like an accusation and a plea. The father closed the notebook slowly, as if silence could undo writing. It couldn't. Footsteps. Dale again, hovering in the archway with a smirk that betrayed nerves. "You think money makes you right," he said. "She throws tantrums. Lorraine does everything. Cooks, cleans, sits up when the kid has nightmares. We're here. Where were you?" The father looked at him, and the shame that question struck didn't show. It fell inward, into a vault where he kept the things he would fix or die trying. "I was trusting the wrong people," he said. "Your daughter screams like that a lot." Dale shrugged, glancing at the front door, calculating exits. "She'll calm down." The father walked past him. The kitchen was small and harsh lit. The fridge hummed. Inside, a half carton of milk, out of date, a bruised apple, condiments. In the pantry, cereal with the price sticker peeling, stale bread, 2 dusty cans of soup. Then another cupboard, locked. He tried the handle. It rattled. He didn't bother with a key. He pulled once, and the cheap wood surrendered. Bottles lined the shelves like small trophies. Not the cheap stuff. The kind that disappears into bank statements like smoke. He stared a beat longer than necessary, then swept an arm across the shelf. Glass thundered against the trash can. The sound dragged Dale into the doorway. "Hey, you can't. Call Lorraine," the father said, steady. "Tell her to come home." Dale lifted his chin. "She's working." "Then tell her the police will meet her here." Dale laughed without humor. "Police? For what? You think they listen to rich men cry about their feelings?" "For child endangerment," the father said, almost conversational. "For truancy. For financial abuse. If I pull your records and find what I already know I'll find." For the bruise on her arm. His eyes narrowed. "And for every time you told her to be quiet when she was asking to be saved." Dale's jaw flexed. "You got no proof." The father turned his phone face up. The screen showed a notification from the private investigator he swore he'd never need. Timed photographs of deliveries, midnight bar receipts billed to a card tied to the child's trust, camera footage from the school's front gate showing no-shows and late pickups. The world leaves trails. Money leaves highways. He hit one button, and the call routed to his driver. "Thomas," he said, never taking his eyes off Dale. "Bring them in." "We're at the door," Thomas replied. Two men entered, calm, tailored, the opposite of chaos. They weren't there to fight. They were there to put air back in the room. The father nodded toward the couch. One of them, older, soft-voiced, knelt near the girl and asked if she'd like water. She nodded. He brought her a glass and sat cross-legged on the floor a short distance away, not crowding, eyes level, making himself small like the father had done. Sirens whispered in the distance, not yet here, but on their way. Dale's bravado splintered. "You're overreacting," he said, but the line had wilted. He bared his teeth in something that wanted to be a grin. "Lorraine will tell them you're trying to take the kid because your money can buy anything." The father didn't flinch. He angled his body so the girl could still see him over his shoulder, so she'd know he was between her and everything that hurt. "I can't buy time," he said. "I can't buy back the days she lost in fear. But I can make sure there aren't any more." He walked back to his daughter, crouched again, the pose of a man relearning a language he should never have forgotten. "I'm sorry," he said, and there was no polish on it. "I should have been here sooner." She lifted her hand, small as a bird. He warmed his palm with it without clasping too tight. "Are we leaving?" she whispered. "Yes," he said. "Right now." Dale moved like a shadow trying to block sunlight. "She's not going anywhere until Lorraine says." The older guard stood without hurry and took one quiet step forward. Dale stopped. The house seemed to decide which side it was on. Knuckles drummed on wood. Two sharp raps that sounded like relief. The sirens had arrived, the blue and red washing the windows with truth. The father didn't look at Dale again. He gathered the backpack, the notebook, the necklace, the only things that belonged to his daughter in this place, and rose. He knew the next hour would be paperwork and statements and calls to people whose job was to untangle what should never have been tangled. He knew Dale would try new lies and Lorraine would rush in with old excuses. He knew none of that mattered as much as the tiny hand that had just, finally, closed around his. As they walked toward the door, the girl tugged his sleeve. "Dad," he paused. "Yeah." Her voice was a thread. "Will they make us come back?" He looked down, and the promise this time was iron. "No," he said. "They won't." Behind them, the house groaned like a stage after the actors have left, empty of its favorite performance. Ahead of them, the night air waited, cool, real, and wide enough to hold a beginning. The police lights bled across the cracked walls like neon veins, pulsing red and blue. Neighbors peeked from half-drawn curtains, whispering into the night, but no one stepped forward. That was how it always went. People heard, people guessed, but silence was easier than truth. Inside the squad car, the little girl sat beside her father. Her backpack rested on her lap, hugged like armor. She kept glancing at the door of the house as if it might open and swallow her back inside. Each time, her father tightened his jaw, his hand hovering near hers, not pushing, not forcing, but present. Dale's voice carried from the porch where the officers questioned him. Loud, defensive, trying to stitch lies fast enough to cover bruises that spoke louder than any excuse. "She's dramatic," he repeated. "Kids cry. Kids bruise. She's got an imagination, writes crazy stuff in notebooks." One of the officers looked down at the spiral notebook the father had handed them. He flipped through pages written in a child's uneven hand. His expression changed, not pity, not shock, but something heavier. He snapped the notebook shut. "Evidence doesn't scream, but it speaks." Lorraine arrived in a rush, still in her work uniform, hair pulled back, eyes darting between police, Dale, and the millionaire standing like stone beside the car. "What is this circus?" she snapped. "You think you can just show up and rip her out of my house?" The father didn't raise his voice. He simply stepped aside so the girl could see her mother clearly. The girl shrank deeper into the seat, her breath hitching. That reaction spoke louder than any argument. "Enough," the officer said. "We'll sort this at the station. For now, the child goes with her father." Lorraine's face twisted, a mix of guilt and pride, denial and loss. She reached out. "Sweetheart, come here." The girl flinched. The father moved then, swift but gentle, sliding into the car beside his daughter, shielding her from hands that only now remembered to reach. The door closed. The sirens flared. And for the first time in months, maybe years. The girl leaned sideways until her head rested against her father's shoulder. He didn't speak. He let the silence settle, but it wasn't the heavy silence of fear. It was the fragile quiet of something broken starting to heal. The ride felt endless, but when they reached the gates of his estate, tall iron, guarded by men who nodded at his arrival, the girl's eyes widened. She had been here before, but only for weekends, brief visits, half promises. This time, the gates opened as if swallowing them into safety. Inside, the house was vast, but warm. Lights glowed golden instead of harsh. A fire crackled in the living room. She blinked at the difference. Her mother's house smelled of stale smoke and cheap alcohol. Here, the air smelled of pine wood and clean linen. "Hungry?" he asked. She nodded, cautious, as if hunger was a trick. He gestured, and within minutes, a housekeeper set down a tray. Warm soup, soft bread, fresh fruit. She stared at it like it might vanish. "Eat," he said softly. "It's yours." Her small hands trembled as she lifted the spoon. The first sip was tentative, the second hungrier, the third unstoppable. Tears fell again. But these weren't the same tears that had cracked the night apart. They were the kind that come when the body remembers safety for the first time in too long. The father sat across from her, his gaze steady but not pressing. He knew money could buy comfort, but it couldn't buy trust. That would take nights like this, quiet, consistent, honest. When she finally looked up, lips trembling, she whispered, "Are you staying?" The question stabbed deeper than any accusation Dale had thrown. He swallowed. "Yes," he said. "I'm not leaving again." She searched his face, testing, daring him to break the promise as so many adults had done. But his eyes held steady. For the first time that night, a flicker of belief passed through hers. Later, when she drifted to sleep in a bed larger than any she'd known, clutching the repaired necklace against her chest, the father stood in the doorway. His fists were still clenched, but not in rage, this time in resolve. The silence of wealth had cost him too much. The silence of neighbors had almost destroyed her. He vowed the weight of silence would never smother his daughter again. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the marble floors and the firelight, he began planning, not just for custody, not just for protection, but for something greater. For justice. Morning came, but it didn't feel like morning. It felt like a reckoning. The house was alive with motion. Lawyers pacing, documents stacking, phones vibrating with calls that would decide more than just custody. Yet at the center of all this, in a quiet breakfast nook, sat the little girl with her cereal, trying to believe that the world outside wouldn't drag her back. Her father sat across from her, papers forgotten, his gaze fixed on her every movement. He wasn't watching for politeness or manners. He was watching for signs of healing. When her lips curved, even slightly, at the sweetness of fresh strawberries, he felt a flicker of triumph greater than any business deal he had ever closed. But battles aren't won in a single night. By noon, the storm arrived. Lorraine entered with Dale trailing behind, both flanked by a lawyer whose arrogance was polished as glass. They didn't knock. They were let in under legal courtesy, not welcome. The girl's spoon froze in midair, her shoulders stiffening, the fragile calm shattering. The millionaire rose slowly. His presence filled the room, but his voice was measured. "You shouldn't be here." "We have every right," Lorraine snapped. "You think you can just take her?" "She belongs with me." The girl whimpered, eyes darting to the floor. "She belongs where she is safe," the father said, his tone sharper now. He stepped forward, placing himself between the intruders and his daughter. Dale smirked, puffed up by the presence of legal backup. "Safe? With a man who leaves her for months? Who thinks money replaces parenting? You're no saint. You're just rich." The father's jaw tightened, but before he could answer, the girl's voice cut the room. It was small, shaky, but it sliced through every lie. "He hurt me." Silence. Then louder, trembling but clear. "He hurt me, and you let him." Her eyes burned at her mother. "You told me to be quiet. You told me not to make trouble." Lorraine's face blanched, her mouth opening, closing, words strangled by truth. The father's roar broke then, not of anger alone, but of a fury laced with love. He pointed at Dale, his voice booming through the high ceilings. "No more. You will never touch her again. You will never speak to her again. If you come near her, if you so much as breathe in her direction, I will make sure every court, every paper, every judge knows exactly what you did." Dale stepped back, his bravado cracking. The lawyer tried to intervene, mumbling about evidence and custody law, but the tide had already turned. The officers waiting outside entered when summoned, clipboards ready, their pens sharp as blades. The girl buried her face in her father's coat. His arm wrapped around her, steady, unshakable. He had shouted not just for her ears, but for every silence that had suffocated her. It wasn't money that gave the words power. It was truth, spoken at last. Lorraine wept quietly, the weight of complicity folding her shoulders. Dale sputtered, his lies dissolving under the heat of exposure. And the millionaire, no, the father, stood tall, his voice the chain breaker, his daughter pressed against his chest, finally shielded, finally free. The house was quieter now, but it wasn't the suffocating quiet of fear. It was the calm that follows a storm, the kind that feels almost unreal. The little girl sat on the edge of a wide armchair, clutching her repaired necklace, her small chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of safety. Her father stood at the window, looking out at the drive where the squad cars had finally pulled away. Dale was gone, taken not just by officers, but by the truth that had chained him. Lorraine had left too, her figure slumped, her protests reduced to silence. For the first time in years, the house held no threats, no shadows, only the fragile light of a new beginning. He turned back toward his daughter. Her eyes lifted, still wet, but no longer drowning. "Are they really gone?" she whispered. "Yes," he said firmly, "and they won't be coming back." She let out a sound that was half a sob, half a laugh. The weight on her chest seemed to crumble. She slid off the chair and crossed the space between them, her bare feet padding softly against the polished floor. She pressed herself into his waist, arms wrapping around him with all the strength she had. For a moment, he froze, because it had been so long since she'd reached for him like this. Then his arms came down, surrounding her, holding her as if he could keep every bad memory locked outside the gates forever. "I thought you'd never come," she whispered against his chest. "I'm sorry I was late," he said, his voice breaking. "But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." Time passed differently in that embrace. The world outside might still be loud, cruel, unforgiving, but inside this room, a father and daughter rewrote their story. Days turned into weeks. Healing was slow but real. She started drawing again, not houses with angry doors or men with dark eyebrows, but fields, sunlight, dogs chasing butterflies. She went back to school, her absences replaced by perfect attendance. Teachers noticed the change, classmates noticed the smile. The father changed too. Boardrooms and contracts still demanded his time, but nothing came before dinner with his daughter, before bedtime stories that sometimes went too long, before the simple promise that she would never go another night wondering if anyone heard her cries. One evening, as the fire crackled, she climbed onto the couch beside him with her notebook. "I want to show you something," she said shyly. He braced himself for more pain, more scars on paper. But when she opened it, the pages were filled with something new, a story. Her story. A little girl who had screamed until her voice broke, but was saved by a man who came home just in time. He read it, his throat thick. "It's beautiful," he said softly. She tilted her head. "It's not finished yet." "No, no," she said, smiling faintly, "because now we get to write the rest together." He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Then let's make it the best story anyone's ever heard." And in that moment, the house wasn't just a mansion. It was a home. If this story touched your heart, if you felt the weight of her pain and the power of her rescue, don't let it end here. Subscribe to Cryspire, so together we can share more stories that remind us. No child should ever suffer in silence, and every voice deserves to be heard.